Good evening, and welcome to On Enclosed Spaces in the Great Outdoors 4, Grounding. You are listening to a radio program on the arts in times of climate crisis, curated and hosted by David Weber-Krebs, that's me, and Jeroen Peters. We are speaking to you from the Kai Studios in Brussels.
We live in an age in which human activity has a profound impact on our physical and ecological surroundings. How can we create stories, aesthetics, and spaces of experience to deal with the situation reflexively and critically? What role can the performing arts play in the debate on climate crisis?
These questions have been the point of departure for Unenclosed Spaces in the Great Outdoors during the past years, which translated itself in a series of performance conferences that took place in theaters. For each edition, a specific theme provided focus. In 2015, it was more than human participation in the theater. In 2018, the limits of the human sensorium. In 2020, haunted scenes, decolonial ecologies. Today's heading, the fourth in the series, is Grounding. This asks for a brief introduction.
Imagine this. A group of about 100 people, visitors of a performance conference, find themselves on stage after a day of lectures and artistic interventions. They lie down, spread out over the entire stage, their senses attuned and their ears pricked up. Through unfamiliar sounds, they catch a glimpse of eerie landscapes that seem to have taken hold of the theater. After a while, they realize that climate change has not only crept into the theater, but has long been entangled with their minds and bodies. The borders between inside and outside are no longer clear. The threshold of the theater no longer rests on firm ground. What remains of the theater as we know it, when its walls crumble and the outside world creeps in? As the human recedes into the background, a thought presents itself. Are the theater apparatus, as well as our daily living environment, simply a decor for human drama? What does a world look like in which humans are no longer center stage and various other actors and agents claim their role? What traces of violence and oppression haunt such landscapes? What are the promises lingering in these emergent ecosystems? Then another thought arises, a counter-image. If we take away the walls of the theater, what remains is a group of people embodying that theater. If the performing arts are after all a matter of people, that is, of imaginary communities and languages, then how can we take its political dimension seriously in these times of ecological crisis? Can we still neatly separate spectatorship from citizenship? Returning to our image of the theater as a roaming community of makers, researchers, spectators and citizens, where can we find a ground to land? When formulating these thoughts and questions over a year ago, little did we know they would be overtaken by reality in unexpected ways. Indeed, what remains of the theater as we know it, when its walls crumble and the outside world creeps in? The COVID-19 pandemic has made some uncanny aspects of the climate crisis into an acutely felt reality. Events, life forms and entanglements beyond our control have entered not only the theater, but also our familiar environments of life and work. Confusion, constraint, vulnerability and grief have mingled with emergent ecosystems, with the prospects of organizing our ways of living and working differently, with our awareness of privilege, and so on. If until a year ago we could consider the theater as a rehearsal space for future scenarios, for practicing alternative ways of gathering and presenting ourselves, during the COVID-19 pandemic and the measures it inflicted, this notion received a reality check and was seriously challenged. Initially intended as a performance conference, On Enclosed Spaces in the Great Outdoors would have happened in April last year at the Kai Studios in Brussels, and this in exchange with a live audience. The title Grounding and our questions have remained the same, yet in dialogue with several guests we've reworked some of the planned contributions so they could be presented as a radio conference, broadcast over 3 consecutive nights from the Kai Studios in Brussels. Where can we find a ground to land? Each night we present 2 contributions by artists who propose their answer to this question. Tonight we'll have speculations about theatre, community and language by theatre maker Weber-Krebs in the actual event. And then researcher Ingrid Vranken, who's gathered a group of people to explore the possibilities of unsinging linear time. Gosie Vervloessem, Mathieu Rodrigo Batista, Nahuel Cano, Mihaela Brebenel, Rasa Alksnyte and Mayfield Brooks. On Saturday, writer Daisy Hildyard and performance artist Sigmar Zacharias present perspectives on absence, entanglement and climate grief. On Sunday, we'll immerse ourselves in practices of crossing spaces with choreographer Julien Bruno, followed by performance artist Annelies Legac and sound designer Lotto Retina. But tonight, we start with the actual event, and I'm happy to give the floor to Weber-Krebs.
Thank you, Jeroen. On February 28, 2020, I stood on stage in the Brakkegrond in Amsterdam with a short lecture performance opening on Enclosed Spaces in the Great Outdoors 3, Haunted Scenes, Decolonial Ecologies. The title of the lecture performance was The Actual Event. And the plan was that a few weeks later, on April 6, 2020, I would stand on stage again, but in the Kai Studios, for the 4th edition of On Enclosed Spaces in the Great Outdoors, Grounding. Here also, I would open the day with the actual event. But in the meantime, all over Europe, the doors of the theatres had been closed, and the event was first postponed and then finally cancelled. Overnight, at least it felt so, we had become dangerous to one another, and our fragility towards each other had been exacerbated. And even the thought to leave the house in order to go to the theatre and spend a moment with some others in that enclosed space had lost its familiarity. As a matter of fact, I could no longer imagine it. And now we're here. I'm in a theatre, but not on stage. I'm in a small improvised radio studio next to the stage. And you are at home, or maybe you are listening to this while you are walking or in the car or elsewhere doing something. And there is something playfully ironic that I end up doing a radio version of this performance. A performance where I try to activate the space and the different invisible agencies that are at stake when people are assembled in an enclosed space. But as absurd and strange and maybe outdated this procedure may be, I'd like you to imagine that tonight we are all assembled in the Kai Studios, in the Rue Notre-Dame du Sommeil, the Onze Lieve Vrouw van Vaakstraat, in the center of Brussels, which is also where I am right now, talking to you. So, let's imagine that you have entered the building a few minutes ago, and that you have climbed up the stairs, and that you maybe have had a drink at the cafe upstairs. You have met a friend there who was already talking with some people you also know, but never was introduced to them. But now, yes. And then the doors of the theatre space open, and everybody enters. And people keep on talking with each other. Actually, a lot of people came tonight. Soon, everybody sits next to one another on the tribune, facing the stage. There are few spaces left in the back. But you are now some 100 people on this tribune. And everybody keeps on talking with the ones in their immediate surroundings. The stage is lit, and by entering, you've noticed that I'm standing upstage left, facing the tribune. And then the lights dim on the tribune and become a bit more intense on stage. And I'm there. And everybody gets silence. I start to speak. And while I'm speaking, I walk very slowly towards the tribune, towards you. The event you are part of involves vibrations that start from the tip of my mouth, travel through the air, and reach the 2 ears of each one of you. The event you are part of is lit by electromagnetic radiations. Waves, dust, smells, dead things, things alive, things to be born. I have now arrived at the foot of the tribune. I can almost touch the persons in the first row. The event you are part of is partly constituted of a heterogeneous organism, bringing in oxygen and flushing out carbon dioxide. All the elements you bring in, you can see them. And all the elements you flush out, you can see them as well. You exchange all sorts of substances. You touch without touching. You kiss without kissing. You penetrate each other's bodies. And now I touch the knee of the woman sitting at the corner in the first row. The event you are part of has been announced as a festival for bacteria. They have met in the handshakes and in the kisses that have been exchanged outside. They joyfully meet in the air right now. Some of them were resting for a long time on these walls. They are reawakening. And now I turn around and I walk back, still at the left of the stage. We, the humans, are discreetly pulsing the event you are part of with a large number of heartbeats. Beating. 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 There are probably also smaller hearts beating in the event you are part of. Now, I'm crossing the stage. Dirt. Thoughts. Ashes. Actors. Touch. Words. Gas. Rubber and leather soles. Body fluids. Dust. Ghosts. I am in the center of the stage, addressing all of you. We are in the Garden of Eden. God tells Adam to give a name to every living being, to the plants and to the animals. Adam fulfills this task. A dragonfly, a melanistic leopard. And while I'm saying this, I point out each time to one specific spectator. A coast redwood tree, a nocturnal bird of prey, a giant polypore, a blue-winged paradise bird, a jellyfish, a dragonfish. Adam makes himself the master of all. Symbolically, they become his property. Then, Adam meets Eve. They eat the apple, and they are thrown out of the garden. Their descendants, or the ones that think themselves as their descendants, continue the job that Adam had started. They colonize, they conquer, they produce. They cross the oceans. They find new land to which they give old names. They find new plants and new animals that were maybe not in the Garden of Eden. They discover. They use the resources. And slowly, they fill every blank spot that remained on the map with content. They know it, they own it, they use it. This process ends with the conquest of the American West. They arrive to California and end up at the Pacific Ocean. Nothing to conquer anymore. Nothing to colonize. So they look up and they see the moon. So they go to the moon. They plant their flag on it, and then, for the first time, they look back and they take a picture. And by saying these last words, I've looked back. I now make a sign with my right hand as if I would hold an imaginary ball between two fingers. I look at it. I make 2 steps to the left and start to speak directly. It's very hot. There's a lot of sand everywhere. It is a large square delimited by big buildings. The buildings must have housed offices or hotels or department stores long ago. They are all brown, as the ground is brown, and the air is brown as well. It is difficult to tell the difference between the ground, the walls, and the air. There are no trees on the square. There is no water. It is hot. A group of maybe 20 people have assembled at one corner of the square. They take shelter at the foot of the building in small groups of 2 or 3. They don't seem to know each other, but they seem to be waiting for the same thing. Then, the front door of the building opens. They all enter the building. When the last one has entered, the person that had opened the door, a small elderly woman who protects her entire body with layers of thin canvas, closes the door behind them. It's a long corridor. There is no artificial light, so it's quite dark inside. The sand has invaded this space as well. The group follows the woman. They arrive at the door. She knocks on the door. Those were the knocks on the door of the theatre space. The doors through which you've passed when you entered some minutes ago. So now I make maybe a few steps to the front and I start to address you again. You, the spectators. So you just sat down a few minutes ago. And you are all well seated. And this is the moment when the man here in the third row stands up. And I point out one specific person on the tribune. He stands up and he passes through the people of his row and he climbs down the stairs and he arrives on stage. And he comes here, next to me. And he sits down. And the only thing he does now is actually to look back at you. He does this in a very relaxed way. And then he relaxes even more. And he goes and lays down on the floor. And I look at him just here, from above. And his head is laying there on the floor as well now. And he keeps on looking at the people that are in this area here, just in front of him, with his head on the floor. He relaxes even more. And then he closes his eyes. And he starts to sleep. Here. In front of you. His body dissolves in the floor. His breathing becomes heavy. And from this moment on, everything that happens here, on the tribune, or elsewhere in the space, has an influence here, on the sleeper. So every sound that is produced in the space, he hears it. He would hear, for example, this piece of paper. But now we are going to do as if. We are going to do as if he would not be here, sleeping in front of you. So we are going to build a kind of invisible bubble around him. Like this. You don't see me, but I make the gesture of building an invisible bubble around him. And we are going to continue with this evening with this invisible sleeper in the middle of the room. And now, during the performance with the live audience, I was slowly, very carefully stepping back, with the hope that the presence of this invisible sleeper would be carefully kept in the minds of everybody during the entire day of lectures and performances. But then there was a screen brought on stage and the technician bumped into the sleeper and my carefully crafted fiction dissolved into thin air. And that was perfectly okay.
Thank you, David. Well, not only the sleeping man seems to be wavering between different imaginary spaces and temporalities. The collective we've invited next is pondering the necessity of what they call unsinging linear time. It's an ecological and decolonial project in search of establishing alternative languages and appreciations of time. This collective of artists, researchers and activists was brought together by Ingrid Vranken in the framework of a rooted ontology lab. in which both plants and ghosts offer inspiration for expressing time differently. During the past months, they were in residence at Weber-Krebs in Antwerp and the Kai Theatre in Brussels, and yet, at the same time, they continued working from their homes, across countries and time zones. And so they will speak to you tonight, as a dispersed community whose vibrations are brought together by the radio. As they introduce themselves in the contribution along with the other voices they invoke, human and more than human, I won't list their names again. Here's Unsinging Linear Time, a glossary for learning how to speak again.
Deadline. A very intimate expression of linear time. The time of death, or the death of time itself. The flowing of time, its potential trapped in one single point. A point of no return. Things get set in stone. I am addicted to deadlines. I need them. I crave for them. Without them, I'm useless and I can barely function. I am a deadline junkie. It's destructive. It takes away my agency. I totally forgot how to operate from a space of pleasure and for the sheer enjoyment of doing something. I live thanks to the deadline. I live in its shadow, in what it allows me to do, or rather, what it commands me to do. It is a drug, a guru, a god. Deadline. Show me your face.
Over the course of November and January, 8 artists gathered. Mihaela Brebenel, Mayfield Brooks, Rodrigo Batista, Rasa Alksnyte, Gosie Vervloessem, Mathieu Charles, Ingrid Vranken and Nahuel Cano make up the we in this reading. The we emerging here is one that reflects the group formation and the given container that is the video call. But also a we that is diffractive, reflective of difference and change, presence and absence, consensus and friction. We chose to multiply the we. We chose to speak with many voices from many different and specific lived experiences, our own and those of writers and thinkers who inspire us, creating a glossary for learning how to speak again. How do we live in this impossible present? This present filled with grief and violence. This present that is calling us to action and at the same time is overwhelming and paralyzing. A present that seems to be running out of time. In order to live these times, we chose to look time itself in the mouth. We understand time as historicity and historiography, but also as lived experience.
We quote Liliana and Calao. As I prepare these words, I remember, touch, that tomorrow we'll gather as we have for several Saturdays now in the neighborhood of the city to sing, to learn songs for daily life, to learn sacred songs that correspond to our lineage, songs to venerate the power of the land. It's Neweneth. We'll continue to recover our memory. All of the land is one soul, and we are part of it.
We quote Ghosts of the African Diaspora by Joan Chasson. Writers and scholars of the African diaspora, among others, have long contested the linear hierarchical vision of a single history that would run its unique course, and denounced it as a highly functional fantasy of the West. Not only has the definition of history as a march of progress served to relegate some people to the margins or indeed outside of history, But in consigning things, events, or institutions to the past, the chronological disillusion or delusion also obscures their continual effects in the present, be they symbolic, social, or material.
We quote Karen Barat in Meeting the Universe Halfway. The existence of the quantum discontinuity means that the past is never left behind, never finished once and for all. And the future is not what will come to be in an unfolding of the present moment. Rather, the past and the future are unfolded participants in matter's iterative becoming. Becoming is not an unfolding in time, but the inexhaustible dynamism of the unfolding of mattering.
We quote Liliana and Kalau. Time is a blade that comes down on you and cuts away the excess, the words, the tears, the long looks at your babies.
We quote Aimé Césaire. The West has never been further from being able to live a true humanism, a humanism made to the measure of the world.
We quote Frank B. Wilderson III. Such gatherings are always haunted by a sense that violence and captivity are the grammar and ghosts of our every gesture. This is where performance meets ontology.
Informed by anti-colonial and indigenous thinkers, we protest linear time. We recognize it as an ongoing kind of violence, a colonial violence. Linear time erases the multiple worldings that could have been, should have been, are ongoing. Linear time makes us believe that history is one grand narrative and that we are currently living its only outcome. Can we recognize the delusion or disillusion of linear time? Not only in how history is being taught to us, but also in how we are experiencing our own lives, finality and responsibilities. What happens to the present when we unsing ourselves from linear time?
I imagine the deadline as a he, gigantic and square, sitting on a stone throne, the emperor in the tarot deck. He only has one head, an enormous square head, a subtle beard, heavy eyebrows, not much fun or fantasy. I'm not really sure if he wears a crown, but yes, definitely a massive sword. He has only one arm, and in that arm, this sword. A sword that cuts the flows of time into little bite-sized Pomodori time chunks. He feeds them to the dog at his feet. Or maybe I am his dog. I can only see his heavy eyebrows and his sword, chop, 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 and his dog, chomp, 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 chomp. My life cut in pieces, reduced to little bits of sausage. My life bite-size. I offer it to you willingly.
When we jump out of the tie, it's a typo. I wanted to write time, but just losing that M, I got a tie. Of the deadline, we land in the dead lines. The lines that are dead. Those lines that apparently leads us to nowhere. But also those other dead lines. Queues of people that are already out of almost everything. Queues for food, to get into a shelter, to have your identity documents checked. If you are queuing, the value of your time labor is suffering a real-time devaluation. And in that sense, your living time is devaluated. VAP means these people do not queue.
I am recalling this lecture by Benedict Zituni and Isabel Stengers that I heard in September, who shared that Deborah Bird Rose and Donna Haraway propose, inspired by Yarralin Australian Aboriginal worldviews, an understanding of the present as a thick present. The present is comprised of all the stories, all the living and dead that are still of importance to the community. The present is a matter of affect. We are still inhabited by the events and entities that have occurred. The retelling or the dramatizing of what has occurred also entails the possibility that things could have been otherwise. Cultivating a living environment is then an environment in which we tell stories, and an environment in which we can listen to the stories that the environment is telling. Our activism for a present of justice for all beings can be strengthened by these stories. We can remember that colonialist capitalism has not yet had the last word, since we are here, alive, and talking about how life can be otherwise. I wonder if ghosts can be an ally in re-experiencing the present as thick, layered, circular, a repetition.
We quote Anat Singh from The Art of Living on a Damaged Planet. As humans reshape the landscape, we forget what was there before. Ecologists call this forgetting the shifting baseline syndrome. Our newly shaped and ruined landscapes become the new reality. Deep histories tumble in unruly graves that are bulldozed into gardens of progress. Ghosts, too, are weeds that whisper tales of the many pasts and yet to comes that surround us. Consider through ghosts and weeds, worlds have ended many times before. Endings come with the death of a leaf, the death of a city, the death of friendship, the death of small promises and small stories. The landscapes grown from such endings are our disaster, as well as our weedy hope.
My question, and maybe an intervention in this thought process, is the potentiality of the ghost. That is to say, that the ghost is our only potential. If the human can be displaced by the ghost, then maybe there is potential. The human will continually doubt the presence and existence of the ghost. Who can teach those who think of themselves as human, because some of us don't and some of us are not considered human, to displace their humanity for the ghost? Shall we give up the ghost? Giving up the ghost means to become the ghost.
We quote Sylvia Wynter, because by the time your colonizer flag goes down, you have already trained your natives. Trained them, as Sartre noted, in the word that you own. That word, while an imperializing word, is also the enactment of the first purely de-godded, and therefore, in this sense, emancipatory, conception of being human in the history of our species. And it is that discontinuity that is going to make the idea of laws of nature, and with it the new order of cognition that is the natural science, possible. So there can be no going back to a before that word. Whether in politics or in epistemologies, discontinuities can only erupt out of seedbeds that have been empirically pre-prepared for them.
Absence. I have little words to imagine absence, because it's not only the negative version of presence. Being absent is just being present somewhere else, or being lost, or not being at all.
Absence makes me think of my friend who passed away last year. She is no more. She is absent from our lives. Strangely, with her physical absence, she's even more present in my thoughts, my dreams, my daily life, and especially the wind. Her absence is very present. It sneaks up on you.
Absence is not vacuum. You can get lost in it. Those who are absent are making themselves present. We can feel the absence. We can mourn them, we can miss them, but also is it possible to fear the absence? There is a possible political articulation from, within, together with the absence. We can fight together with those who are not more, or those who have never been. We can fight to make them present, but also to make present their absence. Absence can be, still is, a political strategy. To strike, to not be present when expected, to make tangible how those who are absent have been moving the world otherwise.
We quote Saidiya Hartman, "The loss of stories sharpens the hunger for them." So it is tempting to fill in the gaps and to provide closure where there is none, to create a space for mourning where it is prohibited, to fabricate a witness to a death not much noticed.
Ancestors. By sitting and talking, by talking more and slow. She got the jewelry of her parents out of the box, their wedding rings. She puts one on her finger. I also try one on, the one of her mom. We talk shyly about what that does to us, how it makes us feel, the anger, the sadness. These rings bond us together and with them, her parents, my grandparents. This is where we come from, those rings, this bond. She talks about being a young girl with an authoritarian father. She talks about creepy nuns. She talks about how it was for her that after her mom died, without questioning, she took the role of a housewife and a wife, because she was a girl and her brother was not.
You are right. This is a point of tension. When we are thinking time is non-linear, working with or being ghost has an activist potential, and at the same time, there is a real loss here. There is real grief that should not be denied or ignored. There is something that remains unresolved.
Breath, water, lungs, laughter, belonging to someone or something. Breath allows for expansion. I belong to breath. My breath does not belong to me. It has its own life. Sometimes I feel that my life does not belong to me. Breath is life, gives life. I can't breathe. I can't breathe this blackness void of life, void of breath. I can't breathe calls up the abyss. the deep, dark antagonism that finds Black life drowning in the Black Atlantic, down here below in the hold. Hold me, let me go. Let my people go. This is how it tastes.
Grief. I think that is one of the defining characteristics of grief, that it is continuously actual, as opposed to sadness, which comes and goes and can fade. I don't think grief ever really fades. It transforms, and then you find that it is possible to walk amidst the absences. To walk amongst absence is our daily grind. This is the environmental grief I often feel. This murderous lifestyle that will condemn us to walk in a landscape of absence. Such a lonely faith. And many won't even notice. How do you see a ghost if you do not know its shape? How do you grieve a loss when you don't even realize something is lost? How we can start grieving imaginations lost?
Rhythm. A rhythm of the body, one belonging to the body, that exists in multiple temporalities, unresolved. A rhythm driving our bodies in and through circles and circuits of continuous global racialized capitalist accumulation, unresolved. A rhythm of stages and transitions in which historiographies are closed up and finished, where some space or another often needs to catch up, unresolved. A rhythm where slowing down and speeding up is done through the body, and where the body lies down in places, face down, at a call of force, most often than by volition, unresolved. What could possibly still get us going? What could move our bodies facing down on the ground? A thought has its own weight. It makes our bodies drop, our heads fall in our hands, as our bodies are stilled, lie down, or at the edge of our beds. We ask, what could possibly still get us going? Perhaps the rhythms imposed and reposed to our bodies, precisely as unresolved, unfinished. Perchance they have something to offer. Could rhythm open the unresolved as a specter, a ghost, a specter that lives in our bodies? A haunting rhythm, traveling unfinished through bodies, places, and histories. Not an anti-historical approach, but in fact, one where meaning is worked through these bodies, places, histories, because it is taken as unresolved. Reminding us perhaps that such an approach might be useful instead of a declamatory presentation of facts. Could rhythm open the unresolved and engage our thinking and bodies in haunting, to make apparent how some histories and the political states of several temporalities and spaces juxtapose?
Portals. Portals are for entering and exiting. Passages, liminal spaces, something predictable or totally unknown. Peaceful and innocent it sounds. You come in, you get out. From one state of being poof, in another state of being. From one kind of time experience to another. Portals are the empty and vast spaces on our journey when we need to slow down and change direction, make choices between multiple possibilities. You can deliberately seek a portal, but you can also end up in one. A portal can seek you or creep up on you. A portal in itself is a sentient being. But what if you get stuck at the portal? Can this insignificant space for passing by become unfriendly or even violent? How to make sure portals like you? Always carry a gift? In Lithuanian, such a gift is called lauktuve. Something little but cute. Or perhaps always have a wild card with you, just in case you need to choose quickly. The answer is already written on it.
Repetition. Repetition could be a nightmare. Past insisting in coming back, bringing its monsters. Also its espantos, to reenact, reactualize the suffering and the open wounds. But also rhythm is only possible because there is a repetition. Without rhythm, time becomes a boring fluxus of continuous novelty towards the end. A continuous present, lost past, until everything ends. Also meaning a memory is impossible without rhythm and repetition. A time without repetition is also a time without reparation. Hence, it's a time full of espantos and undead that we can't make meaning of. A time without repetition is a time we cannot dance with. A time that excludes and forecludes all other ways of experiencing time.
I saw this video on Twitter of a protest in Russia. People had gathered in a large circle on a frozen lake. They were moving and vibrating together. It looked like a magic circle protecting them. The police were afraid to move onto the ice.
We quote In the Dust of This Planet, Eugene Tucker. The aim then of a device as a magic circle is primarily a philosophical one, rather than assuming the division between the natural and the supernatural and to utilize the magic circle to manage or govern the boundary between them. In From Beyond, the magic circle is used to reveal the already existing non-separation between natural and supernatural, the here and now and the beyond.
To embracing our being ghost and joining the community of ghosts, we have to undo the spell, the deceiving glamour of linear time, and live as all that lives in a ghostly, thick present, a time of repetition, a rehearsal for justice. We propose a counterspell, an unsinging of linear time, a floppy conjuring of the ghosts that we are and the ghosts that are with us. We practice to attune our senses.
Prayer to Deadline Daddy. Oh, Deadline Daddy, release me from my sins. Release me from the pressures of life. Release me, heal me, cure me. My productivity is yours and only yours. Under your rule, I may find meaning. Oh, Deadline Daddy, bestow yourself upon me so that I may function, so that I may know what to do with my time. Oh, Deadline Daddy, you who is the only outcome, I pray to you, may your presence be an everlasting pressure upon my days until the hour of my death, in all its linearity. Oh, Deadline Daddy, keep on chopping, munching. Come on with that sword. Cut my time, cut my throat. Amen.
Spell. I wish I would never hurt someone with my words, but I know I do. That is the most common spell one can cast. I say something, and your heart shrinks, your gut turns, you start watering from your eyes. You speak, and I will go away and hide. Words change the world, and some changes cannot be undone so easily. A spell is a suggestion. This is how we could see. This is how time could be. Once we can imagine it, it can be lived, very small and very large.
We quote the words of the community Loflafken Wilkulmapu, compiled by Dani Selko. La historia cambia, y la vamos a cambiar a través de una forma de vivir que es ancestral, y es territorial, y es política, y es nueva. ¿Cuánto tiempo nos callaron? Está sucediendo una transformación ahora, una transformación verdadera, y sí, eso va a traer consecuencias hacia afuera, porque estamos oprimidos y necesitamos no estarlo más. And we translated it. History changes, and we are going to change it through a way of living that is ancestral, and is from the land, and it is political, and it is new. For how long have they silenced us? It is happening. The transformation. A real transformation. And yes, this will have consequences, because we are oppressed and we need to not be anymore.
Spell for rest as rebellion. Grounded by earth, suspended from the ground up. To begin, I invite you to sound out sa and ha, sa ha, sa ha, sa ha, sa ha. Sighs and sounds of awakening to begin this journey. These sounds can accompany the spell as it moves into vibration. Now we come to the vibrations. I invite you into a space of vibration and sound. I will give you a structure, which we will go through. I invite you to try the structure first and then find your own vibrations while standing, sitting, or laying down. You can always go back to the structure or focus on one part of it to keep focus. The key is to stay with the vibration. All of these vibrations can happen horizontally. There is no hierarchy of movement or position. Vibrations can also be tracked and felt in the body. The tracking and feeling of a vibration can happen in stillness, before, during, after, and in place of movement. Find your own vibration. Number 1, tapping the body vibration. Start by placing the palm of hands and fingers on the chest and belly. Find heartbeat and feel breath filling the belly. Gently tap the heart area with one hand and the navel area with the other hand. Try tapping these areas with the palm of the hand, then try it with the tips of the fingers. When you are ready, migrate the tapping elsewhere on the body. Sounding out sa, ha can be included while tapping. Number 2, grounded feet vibration. Plant feet on the ground and bounce the body up and down. Imagine the feet spreading like roots on a tree in every direction. Keep knees soft while bouncing and let the bouncing of the body move the rest of the body effortlessly. This can be done lying down by pressing the heels into the ground and rocking the body by gently flexing the ankle. Experiment sounding sahas and ahas out loud and or internally. Number 3, heels up off the ground vibration. Spread toes and allow the heels to come up off the ground. Press toes and the balls of the feet into the ground and softly shake with heels up. Then transition to shaking the body, moving the heels up and down to release the pressure from the legs. You may notice an activation of the arms, more momentum and swaying happening in this vibration that evolves eventually into jumping. Sounding out ahs and ha's, opening up the mouth, invigorate this vibration. This vibration in number 5 can be substituted by rocking the body on its side while laying down or sitting. Number 5, breaking joints vibration. Articulate joints starting with the pelvis. Move your butt, slow it down, speed it up. Move like a robot, move like a floppy doll, and explore isolated, syncopated movement initiated by the joints. Find a rhythm, find an aha moment. This vibration can be done sitting or lying down, but it may feel more wiggly, so slow it down if you want to get the breaking sensation or the isolations, or just track it in stillness. Number 6, head below heart vibration. Move into a forward bend. Place hands on the ground, then allow the weight of the body to fall into the hands and heels to rise. Shake the head up and down. Shake the head down and the pelvis up. Let the shaking move the body. This may evolve into frog-like jumping, a handstand by kicking the legs up, or a down-up jump. This vibration can induce deep belly laughter. Ah ha 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 ha. After trying out the sequence of vibrations, I invite you to improvise off of them and find your own vibration.
You've been listening to the first day of Unenclosed Spaces in the Great Outdoors 4, Grounding. Please join us tomorrow at 8 o'clock for the second day. With contributions by the writer and essayist Daisy Hildyard, the artist and researcher Sigmar Zacharias, and a talk with some of the participants of this edition of Unenclosed Spaces in the Great Outdoors. Both Daisy and Sigmar reflect on what it is to grieve, on a very human and personal level, as well as climatic grief, and the grief for a certain idea of the future. But they do it in very different ways. First, you'll be listening to a lecture by Daisy Hildyard, and the work of Sigmar will consist in a Soma acoustic listening session, followed by a talk as a direct impression after the listening session. You are very welcome to join us tomorrow at 8 o'clock.